The wind knifed across the mountain road, turning sleet into needles that stung Caleb Rourke's face raw. Behind him, the last porch light of town shrank into the storm. Ahead, nothing but black pines and falling temperature. "Come on, Echo," he muttered, hitching his torn pack higher. But the shepherd mix refused to heel. She stood rigid, hackles raised, staring uphill toward the dark ridge above the road. A low whine vibrated in her chest, not fear. Warning. Far up the slope, through the sheets of rain, a single light flickered once and vanished. Echo pulled hard toward it like time was running out. Echo's sudden pull nearly yanked Caleb off his feet. The dog wasn't confused or panicked. She was locked onto something. Something she sensed through the storm, through the cold that already numbed Caleb's fingers. "Easy, girl," he whispered, but Echo wouldn't budge. Her body vibrated with urgency, nose lifted to the wind, as if catching a scent buried beneath the storm's roar. The ridge above them loomed like a fractured spine. No homes, no trails, nothing but the remnants of his grandfather's land, a place Caleb hadn't visited since childhood. Lightning flared, illuminating the slope for a heartbeat. There, a faint imprint on the snow-slick ground. Boot tracks, fresh, leading upward. Echo barked once sharp, decisive, and bolted toward the ridge. Caleb hesitated only long enough for the wind to shove him forward. Whoever was up there, they weren't moving casually, and Echo trained to detect danger long before he did rarely misread a threat. He followed her into the dark timberline breath, fogging, pulse climbing. The storm swallowed the road behind him, erasing his only retreat. Somewhere ahead, the trees shifted and a metallic clang carried through the wind. Caleb froze. Something was waiting on that ridge. The climb into the timberline stole what little warmth the storm hadn't taken. Snow clung to Caleb Rourke's sleeves, turning fabric stiff against his arms. Every step sank deeper than the last, and the air thinned with the steepness of the ridge. He kept one gloved hand on a branch for balance, the other, gripping the strap of his old pack. Echo moved ahead, in short bursts, stop, listen, then press on her instincts, working faster than the storm's rage. Her tail stayed low, body taut. This wasn't curiosity. It was purpose. Caleb's breath pushed out in harsh fog. "Echo, talk to me, girl." She didn't look back. She only pressed harder toward the trees that thickened like a barricade around the ridge. The land he never meant to return to. As they broke through a curtain of fir branches, the slope leveled just enough to glimpse the valley far below. Through the storm's haze, faint lights shimmered, town lights. The same lights he'd walked away from less than an hour ago, with nothing but a worn pack, a half-grown dog, and a life boiled down to debts and memories that refused to fade. He'd told himself he wasn't running. But being thrown out into a storm again had a way of stripping lies down to truth. The Rourke land stretched across this ridge and the one beyond. A forgotten inheritance tangled in old survey lines and the kind of legal ambiguity no lawyer wanted to unravel. His grandfather, Silas Rourke, had held on to this place like it was his last tether to the world. When he died, nobody claimed it. Not Caleb, not his parents, not the town. It simply went quiet. And now Echo was dragging him toward it as if time had looped back on itself. Echo more than a dog. She wasn't a purebred. She wasn't a certified service animal. But she was trained enough to know when Caleb's thoughts slipped into places darker than the storm around them. Afghanistan had taken pieces from him he didn't know how to get back. Echo had returned some, not all but enough, to keep him moving. She paused again, ears angled forward, nose twitching. Caleb followed her gaze toward a cluster of granite boulders pinned by wind-bent pines. Something metallic flashed again, a quick glimmer barely noticeable through the sheets of rain. A voice rose unbidden in his mind. "Last time you ignored her warning, you woke up in a field hospital." He swallowed hard and kept climbing. A life that didn't quite fit, the storm chilled more than his skin. It nudged old memories loose. The Miller porch, the slammed door. The words thrown at him polished with bitterness, sharpened by disappointment. He'd stayed with them after returning home a year ago, not as charity, he told himself, family, or what was left of it after his wife died. But the truth was simpler. He didn't have anywhere else to go. And now, pushed out and unwanted, he was back on the mountain he swore he'd never return to. 39 years old. Knee rebuilt twice. Bank account nearly empty. Life, a thin stack of misfires and dead ends. Echo stopped suddenly stiff as a stone. Caleb froze beside her. "What is it?" The dog's head tilted. She inhaled sharply, then let out a low, almost trembling whine. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The storm, the ridge, the scent of something old lightning cracked overhead, lighting up the ridge in a ghost blue hue. For a brief second, Caleb saw a clearing up ahead, an opening in the trees where the ground leveled off into a small plateau. Something stood there, a structure, dark, square, sagging under the weight of decades. He blinked against the rain. Granddad's cabin. It shouldn't have been visible from this angle, too far east from the old path. The storm must have shifted his climb off course, dragging him through brambles and hidden trails he'd never used before. But Echo moved toward the clearing like she'd traced the place 100 times. Thunder cracked again. Caleb hurried after her. When he reached the clearing, his heartbeat stalled. The cabin looked exactly how he remembered it from childhood summers, only older, as though time had deepened the wrinkles in its wooden face. The porch leaned, the beams bowed, but the structure remained whole. And through the warped shutters, he could see it light, not warm, not steady. A pulse of dim orange that flickered twice, then vanished. Caleb gripped Echo's collar hard enough for his fingers to ache. "No one should be out here," he whispered. And yet, someone was. A metal scent laced the air. Iron, oil, and something else, earthy and cold like stone pulled from underground. Echo sniffed toward the wooden steps, then looked up at Caleb, her eyes sharp, waiting for the command. He didn't speak it out loud. He only nodded. She surged forward. The porch groaned under their steps, shedding old paint in flakes. Caleb pushed the door with the back of his hand. It swung in with a long, aching creak. Inside dust danced in the faint light of his headlamp. The storm's howl dimmed as the door closed behind them. And in the silence he felt it, the same strange hum he'd felt years ago, in a cave in Kunar province just before a rock slide sealed them inside. A vibration of air thick with history. He whispered, "Granddad, what were you hiding out here?" Inside, ghosts of the Rourke family waited. The cabin was smaller than memory but richer in detail. Every plank carried fingerprints of a life lived alone. A bunk bed, a stove, a table with an oil lamp still standing half-filled. On the fireplace mantel a framed photo eaten by mold. Caleb stepped closer and wiped the glass with his sleeve. His grandfather stood beside a surveying tripod, one hand gripping the tool like a man claiming land with sheer force of will. His eyes, dark, defiant, seemed to stare straight through the decades, straight through Caleb. Echo paced the room, tail stiff nose hitting the floorboards near the hearth. Then she froze, paw raised. Joshua whispered, "Don't tell me." One section of the floor was discolored darker than the rest. Old wood, but newer. Echo pawed it gently, ears pinned forward. Caleb lowered himself to one knee. The rough grain scraped his palm. He pressed down, hollow. A trapped gasp escaped him, breath misting in the cold cabin air. Reflection under the storm's breath. He sat back on his heels, the weight of realization settling over him like a second storm. He'd come to this mountain to escape humiliation, to outrun memories that refused to die. Not to unearth anything, not to chase old rumors his grandfather once whispered late at night about what sleeps under this ridge. Life had whittled him down to survival mode. One breath at a time, one step at a time, one day at a time. But Echo, faithful, relentless, Echo had dragged him here with purpose, not random instinct. She sensed something beneath them, something his grandfather once guarded with his life. Caleb touched the floor again. The cold bled through his glove, dialogue woven with stormlight. "Girl," he whispered, voice rough. "You know, something's here, don't you?" Echo whined softly, pressing her nose against the seam of the floorboard. "You pulled me up the mountain. To this." His breath trembled. "What if I'm not ready for another fight?" Echo nudged his hand insistently, resolutely. He let out a thin laugh. "That's real comforting. Thanks." The storm outside muffled all but the faint hiss of sleet against the shutters. Inside, the cabin breathed with them, an old structure remembering its secrets. Caleb scanned the room again. The oil lamp, the stove, the cracked tile near the sink. None of that mattered. Everything centered on the floor. His pulse quickened. Quiet grace, not a moment of fragile stillness. For the first time in hours, Caleb let himself simply sit. He pulled off his soaked gloves and laid a hand on the warm fur of Echo's neck. Her breathing slowed. The fire in her posture softened just a little. The storm's violence became a distant hum. Memory rolled through him like a slow tide, his grandfather hoisting him onto this very porch, setting a worn quilt around his shoulders, saying, "Land remembers who protects it, kid," more than people do. He had never understood that. Not then, not even now. But sitting in this battered cabin with Echo pressed against him, he felt something stir, not hope exactly, but something shaped like it. The storm could batter the walls all it wanted. For the first time since his wife died, since he'd packed the last of her things, since he'd slept on a stranger's couch with shame curled in his gut, Caleb felt anchored. The land had not rejected him. The dog had not abandoned him. And something beneath these floorboards had waited for him, not for years, but for decades. Echo lifted her head and licked the salt of storm and memory from his fingers. Caleb exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Okay," he murmured. "Show me what you found, girl." Echo thumped her tail once ready. The storm cracked loudly overhead as if the mountain itself answered. And in the hollow space beneath the floor, something shifted. The sound from beneath the floor came again, just a faint thud like a distant door swinging shut in slow motion. Echo's ears snapped forward. She stepped off the discolored plank and lowered her nose, inhaling hardtail rigid. Caleb rose slowly, every joint creaking a protest. "All right," he murmured. "You win." He moved to the corner where an old tool chest slumped against the wall. Hinges, rusted lid bowed. Inside, beneath a nest of mice-chewed rags and a hammer with a cracked handle, he found what he needed, a pry bar, orange paint flaked nearly clean from the metal. The bar felt heavier than it should in his hands. "Stand back, Echo." She obeyed, but only by a foot, watching him with eyes that never blinked. He wedged the pry bar into the seam of the dark plank. The wood resisted at first, swollen tight from years of damp and neglect. He leaned harder. The bar squealed. The plank lifted a fraction of an inch. A rush of cold air seeped through the gap, sharper than the room's chill. It carried a smell, unlike the rest of the cabin stone metal, and something faintly chemical like old oil. Caleb paused, heartbeat thudding in his ears. "You smell that," he whispered. Echo answered with a low, throaty whine. He set his jaw and pulled. The board gave with a crack, splinters flying. It came up in one long piece, revealing a narrow cavity beneath the floor. Not deep, just enough for a person to hide something they never wanted found by accident. He aimed his headlamp down. No spiders, no bones, no rotted stash of cans, just a box. It was steel about the size of a bread loaf, edges, welded surface, mottled with rust. Someone had wrapped it once in canvas, only shreds clung to the corners now. Caleb slid it up carefully, grunting, as the weight surprised him. "Feels like scrap metal," he muttered, "or bad decisions." Echo sniffed along the edges, then sneezed once, as if offended by the age on it. The box had no obvious latch, just a round dial on the front and a stubborn seam. Not quite a safe, but not a lunch pail either. Caleb carried it to the old table and set it down. The legs groaned under its weight. He dug through drawers until he found a flathead screwdriver and a small adjustable wrench. "Granddad," he said under his breath, "if this is just a box of old nails, I'm haunting you." The dial didn't spin, frozen, so he attacked the hinges instead. Each twist of the wrench shrieked in protest. Echo paced a small circle behind him, nails ticking on the floorboards in a restless rhythm. Outside, the storm's wind rose, pressing against the shutters, making the whole cabin exhale a long, low sigh. Finally, with a sharp metallic pop, the last bolt snapped. The lid shuddered open. Inside, wrapped in wax paper and cloth, lay a stack of folded documents, bound with twine, a small leather notebook, and something that caught the headlamp's beam, 3 thick, dull metal bars, each stamped with numbers and a logo nearly rubbed. Smooth. Caleb reached for one. Cold bit his fingertips through the grime. He wiped a corner against his sleeve. The tarnish cleared just enough to show the truth. Gold. Not bright. Not like jewelry. Heavy, muted industrial. But unmistakable. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." Echo cocked her head as if waiting for the joke's punchline. Caleb set the bar down gently and pulled out the papers. The top sheet crumbled at the edges, but the print remained bold and bureaucratic. He held it closer to the lamp. Mineral rights deed. Ridgeland tract owner of record Silas Rourke. Beneath that, paragraphs of legal language seals, embossed signatures looped in dark ink. The second page bore a different heading, notice of dispute. Ridgeline Extraction Project Petitioner. North Star Resources. Respondent Silas Rourke. The date made his stomach dip. 1961. So there had been a fight. On paper, at least. He flipped through the rest survey maps, letters on corporate letterhead, all circling around the same thing, the ridge beneath this cabin. Its veins, its worth. Echo nudged his elbow, impatient. "Yeah," he whispered. "It's real." But the weight in his chest wasn't joy. It was the quiet understanding that men had bled, lied, and disappeared over papers like these. And now they sat on his table, in a rotting cabin, with a storm covering every sound. He picked up the leather notebook last. The cover was scarred, spine cracked, but when he opened it, the writing was steady. His grandfather's hand, page after page of numbers, depths, coordinates, notes scribbled in the margins. One line leaped out, written darker than the rest, the pen having dug into the paper. "They won't stop. If this stays on paper, they can bury it. so I put proof where paper can't reach." Caleb frowned. Proof of what Echo's head jerked toward the door. She stiffened, every muscle taut. A guttural growl rose from her chest, unlike the curious noises she made at squirrels or creaking boards. This was deeper. Warning. Borderline threat. Caleb's skin prickled. "What is it?" he whispered. The wind howled outside, but beneath it he heard it. A sound carried up through the cabin bones. A low hum, faint, rhythmic. Not a storm sound. Not a tree scraping the roof. An engine, far enough away to be muffled, close enough to travel through wood. Headlights swept briefly across the cracks in the shutters, a dim smear of white moving slowly along the tree line. Echo's fur rose along her spine. "Maybe just a snowplow," Caleb murmured, not believing it. No plow would be up here. Not on a forgotten logging track that hadn't seen a county truck in 20 years. The hum cut off. Silence dropped hard. Echo's growl deepened. She stepped toward the window, then back to the table, torn between guarding him and the need to face whatever approached. Caleb's hand found the old hunting rifle mounted above the door before he fully registered moving. The wood was dry under his palm dust, flaking off. He hadn't fired one like it since before he shipped out. He checked the chamber. 3 shells. That was all. He swallowed. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. We're not panicking. We're preparing." Echo shifted closer, shoulder pressed to his leg. The storm that had felt like an enemy minutes ago suddenly became a shield, hiding them, hiding the cabin, muffling everything. But if someone knew this place existed, the storm also hid them. Caleb looked from the rifle to the table, to the gold bar, to the papers that hummed with implications he couldn't yet name. He hadn't asked for this. He'd wanted a dry roof, 4 walls, and enough quiet to sleep through a night without waking to sand and explosions in his head. Instead, he'd found a box that could change his life or ruin it. Echo licked his hand, once sharp and insistent, grounding him. "I could put it back," he whispered. "Slideboard over it. Let the mountain keep its secret." The thought was a warm, cowardly thing. No lawyers, no corporations, no strangers on his land, just him, Echo, and a cabin. It was almost enough. Then he pictured his grandfather's face in that photograph, jaw, set eyes, unflinching. A man who had gone to war with giants on paper and at some point lost. He flipped to the back of the notebook. A final note sprawled across the last page, uneven but legible. "If the ridge calls you home, you're old enough to understand. They cheated more than a miner. They poisoned more than rock. If you walk away, they win twice." Caleb's throat tightened. Poisoned, not just taken. Echo whined softly, eyes flicking between him and the door, as if she could feel his indecision weight the air. He exhaled a long, shaking breath. "Looks like we're not walking away," he said. The words surprised him with how solid they sounded. Echo's tail gave a small, firm wag. He moved quickly after that. Decision had a way of sharpening everything. First, he repacked the box documents, notebook, gold bars, then added the old photograph from the mantel. He found a roll of plastic drop cloth in the corner, left over from some long-ago repair, and wrapped the box tight before tucking it under the bunk behind a slat where an intruder would have to tear the place apart to find it. Next, he dragged the pried-up floorboard back over the hollow, fitting it as best he could. The seam was darker, now scarred by the metal bar, but it was something. A patch. The rifle stayed near the table. He loaded the other 2 shells into his pocket. Echo followed each movement, silent and focused. He went to the window and slowly peeled back a corner of the curtain. At first, all he saw was white. The storm had thickened snow slanting sideways. Then, through the veil, he made out the faint outline of a vehicle tucked into the tree line at the far edge of the clearing. Dark SUV. No headlights now. Just a hunched shape gathering snow. He couldn't see faces, but he felt eyes. Watching. A flash of metal glinted at one of the side mirrors. Not chrome. Something smaller. Binoculars, maybe. He let the curtain fall, heart tapping fast but steady. "Somebody knows about the ridge," he said quietly. "Maybe they've known all along." Echo's ears flicked toward the SUV, as if she could see through wood. Caleb moved to the old wall phone, out of habit fingers grasping the receiver. It was dead cord, brittle line, long since cut. No cell signal pinged this high in a storm. No help, no backup. Just him, the dog, and the choice he'd already made. He set the receiver down gently. "Echo," he said, crouching to meet her eyes. "This isn't just about us getting through the night anymore." The dog blinked slowly, leaning into his hand. He felt foolish talking to her like she understood every word, but she understood enough. "They took something from him," he said. "From this land. Maybe from the folks downhill who never knew what seeped into their water. We don't know the whole story yet. But he glanced at the table, at the ghost of the box's weight, at the storm-blurred SUV beyond the walls. We're going to find out. Echo huffed a soft sound that vibrated against his palm. Caleb straightened his spine slower than his resolve. He walked to the door, slid the iron bar down into its bracket, securing it against the frame. Then he checked the back window, the side one, every latch that still held. When he finished, he stood in the center of the room, listening to the wind hammer and hiss around the cabin. The mountain had closed its hand around them. There would be no quiet, anonymous winter here now. No drifting through days. Whatever his grandfather had started, whatever those papers proved, Caleb Rourke had just stepped into it. And the men in the SUV hadn't come up that ridge in a blizzard to give him a welcome basket. He picked up the notebook again, flipped to the map, sketched across 2 pages, a cross-section of the ridge tunnels marked in neat lines, one circle drawn directly beneath a tiny square labeled cabin. Underneath in penciled letters, his grandfather had written, "If they're reading this, they're already too close. Take it to someone who can't be bought." Caleb closed the book gently. "We'll need proof," he said aloud. "We'll need help. And tomorrow, if this storm lets us off the ridge, we're going to find it." Echo gave a quiet bark once. Agreement. Outside unseen, the SUV's engine coughed back to life, rumbling low before fading as it rolled backward down the track. Caleb didn't relax. The storm had given him cover and revelation in the same breath. Now there was only one way forward. He and Echo would survive the night. Then they would carry his grandfather's secret down the mountain and into a world that had forgotten Silas Rourke's name, whatever it cost. The storm eased sometime past midnight, but only in the way a clenched fist might loosen before striking again. Snow drifted steady and thick, soft enough to quiet the world, but heavy enough to bury tracks within minutes. The cabin became an island, no road, no path, only white, swallowing white. Caleb stayed awake, not pacing, not jittering, just listening. Echo lay near the door, chin on her paws, but eyes half open, tracking every creak of settling wood. Her breath made small clouds in the dim air. The old stove struggled to keep up its heat, thin against the storm, pressing through the seams of the cabin walls. Caleb rubbed his hands together, warming the joints before losing feeling entirely. The pry bar, the notebook, and the rifle all sat within reach. But even with the preparations, a knot sat deep in his chest, coiled, patient, refusing to ease. His grandfather's words haunted him. "If they're reading this, they're already too close." Caleb whispered into the dim light. "What did you know, old man?" Echo's ear twitched at his voice. Close to 3 a.m. Echo's head lifted. No growl, no bark, just her spine stiffening like a taut wire. Caleb held his breath. A moment later, he heard it too, a faint thump outside. Then another, slow, heavy, deliberate, footsteps, deep ones. Someone was circling the cabin. Caleb lowered to a crouch and whispered, "Stay." Echo froze, trembling with restraint. Another thump. Then, a scrape of metal against wood, the unmistakable sound of someone testing the back window frame. Caleb slipped to the far wall, moving without sound, counting each footstep outside as if reading a pattern. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry. They were probing, searching. Testing the cabin like a predator, testing the perimeter of a wounded animal. The back window rattled, once, twice, a third time, then stopped. Silence pulsed like a heartbeat. Caleb eased closer, slipping the rifle to his shoulder. A low male voice muttered through the wall, harsh, impatient, not meant to be heard. "We're not waiting till daylight." Caleb's chest tightened. They weren't alone. A second voice, cold, measured. "Stay quiet. If he's awake, he's armed." Caleb exhaled, barely audible. 2 men. Maybe more. They shifted again, snow crunching under boots. Echo pressed against his leg, muscles trembling, but not from fear. She was waiting for him to give a command she already knew he wouldn't. Not yet. If they wanted in under cover of night, they would have kicked the door off its hinges already. This was reconnaissance. A test. The kind that comes before something larger. Caleb leaned to the window's edge and whispered, barely moving his lips, "Don't blow our only chance, girl." Echo's tail twitched her version of acknowledgement. After another minute, the footsteps retreated. Slowly, deliberately, as if ensuring he knew they were leaving because they chose to, not because he'd stopped them. Caleb tracked the movement until even Echo's ears lost them. Only then did he breathe. He stepped to the table where the box had been. It wasn't there anymore, he'd hidden it well behind the bunk, but the empty space held weight. He opened his grandfather's notebook again, scanning until he found the page he'd memorized already. Core sample, anomalies, higher radiance. Flow beneath ridge, unnatural. calls itself upward, radiance, flow, anomalies. Words that didn't match gold mining. Something else had been under the mountain. Something that made corporations with deep pockets behave like wolves. Caleb whispered. What did you find down there? Silas Echo rested her muzzle on his knee, grounding him. But his mind drifted unbidden to another time, another place. Brown sand, burning air, the metallic taste of adrenaline. The field hospital. The moment he woke after the blast. Light stabbed through the canvas tent like a blade. He jerked upward, or tried to. Pain seized his right leg, turning the world into a whirl of light and choking dust. Men shouted. Something beeped near his head. A nurse pressed him down. Easy, Rourke, you're okay. You're okay. Where his voice cracked. The patrol, half made it back, half didn't. Caleb's breath caught. Colton Reyes. The nurse lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. He tried to rise again, fists clenching. No, I felt Colton right behind me. He pushed me forward. You were unconscious when they found you. Shrapnel to the thigh concussion. You're lucky you're alive. Lucky. He stared at the canvas ceiling. The word felt like a curse. Weeks blurred into rehab. Hospitals. A stateside base. He walked again, but something in him didn't. When he shipped home, his wife was already in hospice. Cancer doesn't wait for deployments. He lost her a few months later. And the Miller family had been kind until the kindness ran out. He snapped back to the present with a sharp inhale. Echo nudged his hand. Yeah, he whispered. Still here. When dawn smudged pale gray across the sky, Caleb still hadn't slept. The stove sputtered on dying embers. Cold crept in. The world outside was blanketed in white, clean, soft, deceptive. Footprints should have remained near the cabin. But they didn't. The storm had erased the night completely. Caleb stepped onto the porch, Echo beside him, the air bit with the kind of cold that clears the noise in one's head. He scanned the tree line. No vehicle, no track. But the ridge held a strange tension like it was waiting. He walked to the edge of the clearing, Echo sniffing for scents underneath the fresh snow. And then he saw it, not tracks, not vehicles. Something worse. A black drone. Half buried under a branch, small and sleek, the kind used by corporate survey crews or private security. One rotor broken, likely from the wind. Caleb cursed under his breath. They're not guessing, he murmured. They're mapping. Echo growled at the drone, circling it like prey. He knelt beside it. The camera was intact. The lights still blinked faintly, meaning the memory card inside survived. He looked at Echo. Well, that's not comforting. She barked once, a sharp agreement. Caleb tucked the drone under his arm and headed back to the cabin. The pieces clicked into place with dreadful clarity. Someone had been watching the ridge for weeks. Not for him. For the land. And last night wasn't an accident or curiosity. It was confirmation. Someone saw movement up here, light maybe, or heat, and came to check. And now they knew someone knew. Caleb whispered, "We need to get off this mountain." Echo lifted her head, reading the tension in his voice. He grabbed the notebook, the hidden box, the rifle, and the drone. No more hesitation. Storm or not, danger or not, they were leaving today. Behind the cabin, buried under a tarp, stiff with ice, sat his grandfather's old Ford. The truck looked like it had been forgotten by time paint-faded tires, half sunk into frozen mud windshield fogged with age. Caleb tore the tarp back. "Please don't be dead," he said. He popped the hood. Echo sniffed at the tires as if checking for mice. The battery looked ancient. He scraped off corrosion, tightened a loose clamp, checked the oil dipstick with fingers already going numb. He slid into the driver's seat. Echo hopped in behind him, shaking snow over the cracked vinyl. He clicked the key forward. Nothing. He tried again. A low groan. A cough. Then silence. Caleb slapped the steering wheel. Come on. Come on." Echo pressed her muzzle against his shoulder. He didn't want to look, but he knew before the storm last night someone had been close. Someone had approached the cabin. Someone had time to sabotage the truck. He stepped out, reached under the chassis. His fingers touched something wrong. A tubing line. Cut clean. Fuel line. He stared at it, exhaling through clenched teeth. "They're not letting us drive out." Echo gave a frustrated bark. He knelt beside her. "It's okay. We still have our legs. And we know this mountain better than they do." But the truth hovered like fog. Without the truck, without a phone signal, without a trail that wasn't buried, they weren't leaving unnoticed. Caleb took a slow breath and said, "We're going the long way down." He grabbed the rifle, slung the pack over his shoulder, and tucked the drone safely inside. Echo stepped to his side, ready to follow. They moved into the trees deeper than last night, taking a path only half remembered one his grandfather had called the South Line decades ago. The trail wound along the slope, narrow in places marked by half-rotted fence posts that leaned like tired sentinels. Caleb walked with purpose, but kept his pace measured, scanning for movement. He whispered, "Eyes open, Echo." The dog trotted ahead, nose to the snowtail, sweeping steady. Half a mile down, the tree line parted, revealing a ridge that overlooked the lower valley. Smoke rose from a distant cluster of rooftops. Civilization, safety, evidence. All he had to do was reach it. He could get the drone's footage decrypted, get the documents scanned, bring everything to someone who couldn't be bought. Grace Monroe, retired sheriff, or hell, the nearest news outlet if he had to. But as he took a step forward, Echo stopped dead. Her nose lifted, lips peeled back slightly. A warning. Caleb crouched instantly. "What do you see?" She stared toward a fallen log. Caleb's eyes followed and froze. Bootprints. Multiple. Fresh. Leading both up and down the south line. He swallowed. "They're covering every exit." Echo growled softly. The storm had hidden tracks everywhere except here where wind couldn't reach under the ridge overhang. Caleb's breath fogged out slowly. They weren't just being watched. They were being herded. Caleb crouched, low fingers brushing the edge of the fresh boot print. Snow hadn't filled it in yet. It was sharp, deep, weight distributed toward the toes, a sign of someone walking fast uphill, someone in a hurry. Echo growled, the sound rumbling low in her throat. "Yeah," Caleb whispered. "I see it too." He followed the line of tracks with his eyes. They curved behind the fallen log, then split, one set heading uphill toward the cabin, the other twisting downward, like someone circling around to cut off escape. The storm hadn't erased these, which meant they were less than an hour old. Whoever came through here, his breath shuddered. They're still close. Echo stepped in front of him, body angled toward the thicker trees to the east. Her tail-stiffened ears pointed forward. A second warning. Caleb followed her gaze and saw movement. A faint flicker of dark fabric between the pines. Too fluid to be an animal, too tall to be a branch. He whispered down. Echo dropped to her belly immediately. Caleb sank behind the log, heart pounding. Footsteps, slow, calculated. A crunch every few seconds, the pace of someone who knows exactly where to place their weight to keep quiet. Caleb gripped the rifle. Through the branches, a figure emerged just long enough to confirm the truth. Black coat, high collar, no hat, no hesitation. A professional, not a local hunter, not a hiker. Corporate security. Helios, Caleb whispered. They're blocking the south line. Echo's breath came fast, not from fear, anticipation. Ready to defend, ready to strike on command. But Caleb shook his head. Not yet. They waited silent until the man drifted out of sight, footsteps fading into the snow's suffocating hush. Echo lifted her head slightly, questioning. "We can't go down," Caleb murmured. "They're pushing us east." And east meant the old survey tunnels, the ones his grandfather never spoke about, the ones local kids whispered were haunted or poisoned or both. He slung the pack tighter. "Come on." Before the storm closes the ridge again, the wind sharpened into a blade as they pushed east along the ridgeline. Snow drifted high enough to swallow Caleb's boots, and Echo had to leap through it in bursts. The trees thinned, giving way to rock cliffs, carved by old quarry tests from the 1,950 seconds. The mountain here didn't look alive. It looked excavated. Exposed ribs of stone jutted from the earth, pale gray under the fading light. Echo slowed, nose quivering. "You smell something," Caleb whispered. She pressed low to the ground, sniffing a patch of snow that seemed no different, until Caleb looked closer. Droplets. Tiny. Frozen. Red. Blood. Fresh. Echo licked the edge of one, then recoiled, sneezing. A sign it wasn't animal blood, too metallic. Too chemical. Caleb's stomach tightened. Someone else got hurt out here. He rose very slowly. Then, a distant metallic clang echoed across the ridge, same sound he'd heard last night. Echo's head jerked toward the cliff face. Caleb followed her line of sight, a dark opening in the rock, partially hidden by snow drifts and a collapsed support beam, a tunnel mouth. The old survey access. Caleb squinted. He'd forgotten these existed. Back when he was 12, his grandfather had snapped at him for wandering near this part of the ridge. "Don't go near those shafts, boy. The mountain's got old bones. Don't wake 'em." At the time, Caleb thought he meant bears or loose rock. Now he wondered what else Silas Rourke had feared. The tunnel's wooden frame sagged under decades of rot. Snow piled against its threshold like the mountain was trying to bury it. Echo stood at the entrance tail, dragging low, uncertain. "You want to go inside?" Caleb asked. She didn't bark, didn't whine, just looked back at him with that same urgent certainty she had on the road last night. Someone had been here. He stepped closer, brushing snow from the side beam. Fresh boot print. Another. Then drag marks. A large object had been hauled inside the tunnel. Caleb touched the drag line. It was shallow, no more than 2 hours old. He met Echo's eyes. "They're using the tunnels." Echo's nose twitched as she sniffed the air moving from the tunnel, thin drafts of cold carrying the scent of old iron, damp stone, and something chemical that made Caleb's throat tighten. It wasn't natural, not at all. He stepped inside. The tunnel sloped downward slowly, just enough to make his calf muscles burn with each step. Echo stayed ahead, her paws silent on the rock. Caleb's headlamp cast narrow light across rusted rails embedded in the floor tracks, left over from mining carts that hadn't been used in 60 years. Wooden support beams bowed inward, some cracked, others missing entirely. Every footfall echoed. Water dripped from somewhere deeper in the dark. Caleb whispered, "Stay close, girl." Echo brushed his knee with her shoulder confirmation. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Not a gradual cold, but sudden, like stepping into a refrigerated vault. Then Caleb saw it, a light, faint, flickering. Not natural like glow from lichens. Not warm like a lantern, a harsh buzzing blue-white. Echo froze, growled low. Caleb killed his headlamp instantly. Darkness swallowed them. But the faint, electric pulsing remained coming from the chamber ahead. He moved silently to the tunnel's curve, pressed his back against rock, and slowly peeked around the corner. His breath hitched. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber where the ceiling rose high and jagged like a stone cathedral. Old mining equipment lay discarded against walls, carts, rusted drills, splintered scaffolding. But in the center, a rectangular device, modern, metallic, blinking with a blue LED panel, a portable generator. Attached to it, a tripod-mounted scanner facing the left wall, its lens rotating in slow, mechanical sweeps, like it was reading the stone, like it was mapping something hidden. Echo's growl vibrated against Caleb's boot. He whispered, "It's a mineral spectrometer." No company would bring one of those into a defunct survey tunnel unless they believed something valuable, something protected was buried in the mountain's core. But why here, why now? Caleb stepped closer. The scanner's rotating beam passed over a section of the stone wall that was unnervingly smooth, unnaturally smooth, like the rock had been melted and rehardened. He shined a sliver of light at it. A pattern emerged on the wall. Dark veins, almost black, like the roots of a burned tree frozen in stone. They pulsed faintly with light. Just for a second, Echo whimpered. Caleb whispered, "What in God's name?" Is that he reached toward the stone surface. Before he could touch it, a voice echoed from deeper in the tunnel. "Should have been back by now." Caleb jerked backward, rifle up. Echo crouched, teeth bared. Footsteps approached, multiple, fast. Caleb scanned the chamber, no exit except the tunnel behind, and a secondary shaft partially caved on the far side. He whispered Echo, quiet. She obeyed instantly, though her body shook with tension. The footsteps grew louder. Men, 3 at least. Their flashlights flickered down the tunnel. Caleb grabbed Echo by the collar and pulled her into the secondary shaft, barely a crawl space. The ceiling sagged. Stone dust sprinkled onto his back. He pressed a hand over Echo's muzzle gently. Her body went statue still. The men entered the chamber. Bootsteps, then voices. One annoyed sharp. "What do you mean he wasn't in the cabin?" Another voice, cold-controlled. "He was there last night. Tracks prove it." A third, nervous. "What if he already found it?" Caleb's pulse hammered. The first man scoffed. "He doesn't know what he's looking at." The second replied, "If he found the box, he knows enough." A long pause. Then the cold voice said, "Kane wants confirmation by tomorrow. If that vet is anywhere near what Silas hid, we take him." Silas. His grandfather. Caleb swallowed, hard eyes, stinging with memory and disbelief. Echo pressed closer, chest trembling. The scanner beeped. One of the men tapped it. Reading spiked. "It's definitely here." "We're close," another muttered. Caleb's blood ran cold. Here, under this ridge. Something his grandfather died protecting. Something far bigger than gold. He dared one glance at Echo. Her eyes reflected faint blue from the scanner's pulse, bright, alert, scared, and brave all at once. He whispered so softly it was barely breath. "We need to get out, now." But as he shifted his weight, the shaft ceiling groaned. A cascade of gravel tipped loose. Echo stiffened. One of the men turned his head sharply. What was that? Caleb's throat closed. Another chunk of rock broke free, fell, hit the floor with a dull thunk. Silence. Then the cold voice said, "Someone's in here." Rock dust sifted into Caleb's hair as the last pebble settled. "Someone's in here." The cold voice echoed through the chamber like a verdict. Echo's muscles bunched ready to spring. Caleb pressed his forearm gently across her chest, holding her back. His own breath came shallow, too loud in his ears. Bootsteps shifted. A beam of light swung toward the secondary shaft. Caleb flattened himself against the rock, pulling Echo into his chest. The shaft was barely wider than his shoulders. One wrong move, one crunch of gravel. The flashlight beam stabbed just inches from his boot, cutting through the dust. "There," one man said. "Hear that collapse? Something's in that crawl." A second man snorted. "Could be a coyote." "Coyotes don't open floorboards," the cold voice replied. The light began to creep into the shaft. Caleb's fingers tightened on the rifle. If they pushed their way in, he could maybe take the first man, maybe the second. And then, what he felt Echo's heart hammer against his arm. He counted the boots he'd heard. 3 at least, maybe 4. All with better firing angles in an open chamber than he'd have jammed in this stone throat. The cold voice spoke again, closer now. "Come out of there, Mr. Rourke." Caleb's chest went ice cold. He hadn't given his name to anyone. "Not up here." The man continued, tone patient, almost polite. "We know who you are. We know your grandfather. We don't want to shoot in a confined space. Bad for all of us. So let's have a conversation." Echo let out a tiny, involuntary rumble. Caleb whispered so softly his lips barely moved. "Easy, girl, easy." The flashlight beam edged deeper into the shaft. Caleb's mind raced. If they got a clear line of sight, it was over. If he fired now, bullets could ricochet. Hit Echo. Bring the whole ceiling down. His gaze flicked past the men's shadows to the left wall of the main chamber. The weird, black-veined rock, faintly pulsing when the scanner hit it. A thought surfaced fast, reckless. Train charges used to collapse cave entrances, to close off enemy tunnels. His grip on the rifle loosened. He shifted his hand instead toward the ceiling of the shaft. That soft crumble of stone earlier, the mountain here was barely holding itself up. The flashlight glare hit his boots. "There," one man said. He's right. Caleb drove his shoulder upward, slamming his back into the sagging rock above. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the shaft groaned. Rock cracked with a sharp, brutal snap. The world shook. The flashlight beam jerked wildly as chunks of ceiling tore free. Caleb grabbed Echo and rolled backward just as a cascade of stone crashed down where they'd been. Dust exploded into the shaft, choking, blinding. A man shouted, cut off mid-word as the entrance collapsed. Echo yelped once in surprise, kicking against Caleb's arms but not fighting him. He landed hard on his side, ears ringing. For a few terrifying seconds he couldn't breathe. The air was all grit and shock. Then he coughed, lungs burning, and realized they were still alive, and the voices on the other side were muffled. "You see him, shafts blocked. Get the gear," Caleb rasped. "We just bought time." Echo licked dust from his chin, eyes wide but focused. He turned, crawling deeper into the shaft. The space narrowed, forcing him onto his elbows. The air grew colder, pulling heat from his fingers. Behind them the men shouted orders, stone being pried away. "They'll clear it," he croaked. "We've got minutes." Echo crawled ahead now, paws finding tiny ledges. The shaft angled downward, then leveled, then suddenly dropped off into open space. Caleb's hand slid into nothing. He grabbed the edge, heart jumping. He flicked his headlamp on for a split second, shielding it with his hand. Below them yawned another tunnel. Wider, older, no scaffolding, just raw gouged stone. "Great," he whispered. "More mountain." He eased himself over the edge, hanging by his fingertips for a moment, before dropping the last few feet. He landed with a jolt that shot lightning up his injured leg. Pain flared. He bit back a sound. Echo landed beside him, knees bending gracefully, barely making a noise. She looked up at him, ears pricked. "I'm okay," he panted. "Just older than I remember." Above them, the shaft mouth was now just a dark hole, half choked with debris. Voices filtered faintly down, angry and frustrated. Caleb killed the lamp again. He and Echo stood in the dark, breathing in cold, damp air that smelled of old mineral and something else sharp, metallic, faintly sweet, like the air above the black-veined wall. "Granddad," he whispered to the dark, "what tunnel did you dig us into?" He turned the headlamp back on, this time shading it toward his boots. The beam touched the walls in narrow, cautious sweeps. No support beams here, no rails. Just a narrow, natural corridor carved by water or men decades ago. The stone was different, too darker, striated with veins of that same unnerving black like soot frozen into the rock. Echo sniffed one of the veins, then pulled back with a soft sneeze. "You don't like it either," Caleb murmured. He walked, counting steps, listening for pursuit. Faintly behind them, tools clanged. They were already working to break through the collapse. He had to move. He traced his fingers along the writing, scratched into one wall, old shallow letters eaten by time. Rourke 1957, barely legible, then below it, no farther. Caleb's breath caught. Silas. He ran the light over the rock ahead. Someone had sunk a series of hand-drilled cores into the wall at one point. The cores were gone, but the holes remained evenly spaced along the black seam. Core samples. His grandfather's notebook flickered in his memory. Core sample, anomalies, higher radiance. Flow beneath ridge, unnatural. Radiance, he whispered. You weren't talking about gold, were you? He turned toward Echo. She tilted her head, waiting. When they first drilled out here, it wasn't just ore. It was something hotter. Something the company didn't want on the books. He pictured the strange pulsing in the rock. The scanner. The generator. The urgency in the men's voices. They weren't here to reopen a mine. They were here to manage a mistake. Or bury it. His chest tightened. What did they bury under this mountain? Echo's ears flicked backward. A soft sound drifted toward them. Not rock, not tools, water, running. He followed the sound. The tunnel sloped gently until the air grew wetter, cooler. The floor under his boots changed from grit to slick stone. Then the passage opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking an underground stream. The water slid through a trench carved into the rock, glowing faintly where the headlamp glanced off it. Caleb crouched at the edge. The stream looked too clear, too clean, but the smell, sharp, metallic, like penny taste in the mouth. Echo whined, backing away. Yeah, he said. I wouldn't drink it either. He watched the water slide past, swift and purposeful. Stream runs downhill, he murmured. And downhill from here, picture-flashed kids sledding in town. Women filling glasses at kitchen sinks. A tiny plant downstream that once processed bottled water for half the county. His gut twisted. This wasn't just about stolen minerals or buried gold. This was about contaminated water. About whoever had lived under this ridge trusting wells and taps. His grandfather's note echoed in his head. They poisoned more than rock, Caleb whispered. You knew. You tried to stop it. Echo leaned into his side, sensing his change in breathing. The tunnel shook faintly, then just enough to rattle small stones from the ceiling. Behind them, distant voices shouted. They were through the collapse. They're coming, he whispered, and they can't let this get out. His goal shifted in that moment. Before it had been simple, protect what Silas left. Find a lawyer. Get what was his. Now he needed proof that would survive, even if he didn't. He needed to show the world what Apex Terra or whatever shell company sat on those documents had done to this ridge. He needed to make sure nobody could quietly buy him off and close the mountain over Silas Rourke's secret again. Echo nudged him, impatient. He stood. All right, he said. Change of plans. We're not just getting out. He looked at the stream, at the black veins in the rock, at the tunnels looming dark. We're taking this with us. He backtracked along the ledge until he spotted it, a narrow shaft climbing diagonally out of the tunnel, barely wide enough for a man to fit. At the base of the climb, someone had driven old iron spikes into the rock, forming a crude ladder. Most were rusted. A few looked newer, hammered in with a surer hand. Silas's hand. Caleb aimed the beam upward. The shaft climbed at least 20 feet, then bent out of sight. Looks like your idea of subtle granddad, he muttered. Echo stared up the shaft, then back at him, uncertain. We can do it, he said. We've handled worse walls. He slung the rifle over his back, tightening the strap until it dug into his shoulder. Then he wedged his boots onto the first spike, grabbed the next with his left hand, and began to climb. The spikes wobbled, one bent under his weight. His injured leg shook. Echo whined below. I'm not falling, he grunted. Too stubborn. He reached down with one hand. Come on, girl. Hup. They'd practiced this before, back on training fields and obstacle courses. Echo bunched her muscles and sprang claws, finding his forearm and the lower spikes. He lifted with everything he had. She scrambled paws, scrabbling against rock, until she hooked her front paws on the next rung. Atta girl, he panted. Step by step, spike by spike. They climbed together. Halfway up, a muffled shout echoed from below. Light flickered faintly at the tunnel's entrance, ghosts of flashlights brushing the stone. One man's voice cut through. "Rourke, you can't outrun this mountain." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Watch me," he muttered. Echo's paw slipped. She dangled for half a heartbeat. Caleb lunged, pinning her chest against the rock with his elbow. His fingers scrabbled for a higher spike. "Found it. Breathe," he rasped. "You're okay. You're okay." Her heart hammered under his arm. He felt his own heartbeat sync with hers. He pushed them both upward. At last the shaft widened. A faint draft moved past his face, cold, clean, tinged with pine. Daylight. He shoved against a slab of wood wedged above his head. It moved a fraction of an inch. He tried again, shoulder burning. The slab broke free in a shower of snow and dead leaves. He hauled himself up and out into blinding white. Echo scrambled past him, shaking snow from her fur. They lay there, a second, gulping cold air like water. Snow-laden branches hung overhead. They were in a stand of firs on a slope he recognized now east of the cabin, near a ravine that led toward the back road. He'd played here as a kid. Silas had dragged him away once with a harsh grip and worried eyes. "Not this part, boy. Mountain keeps things here I can't protect you from." Caleb rolled onto his back, staring up at the sky. Now he knew what his grandfather had meant. Echo nudged his shoulder, urging him up. He listened for pursuit. Below, muffled voices rose faintly through the shaft. They'd found the underground stream. They'd seen his tracks leading to the climb. They'd know he was topside again. "On our feet," he said, pushing up. "They won't stop at the ridge, Echo. They'll come down into town if they have to." He thought of the drone, the scanner, the stream. His mind spun once, then settled around a new objective like a compass lining to north. "We're done running from this," he said. He knelt beside Echo, hand firm on her neck. "We're going to show them what they did. We're going to make sure every drop of that water, every inch of this ridge ends up in front of someone who can't be bought." Echo's amber eyes locked onto his. She wagged her tail once. Agreement. Partnership. A new mission accepted. Caleb straightened shoulders, squaring against the cold. "We get to town, we get to someone with a badge or a camera, and we hold until the truth gets bigger than their bullets." Behind them, the shaft they'd climbed from exhaled a faint draft. Below, the hunters regrouped. Above, the mountain watched. Caleb adjusted the rifle strap and nodded toward the trees. "Let's move, soldier." Echo jogged ahead, cutting a clean line through the snow. The ridge no longer felt like exile. It felt like a battleground. And this time, he wasn't fighting for a country on the other side of the world. He was fighting for the land under his feet, the water under the rock, the people drinking downstream, and the name of a stubborn old man who'd tried to warn them all. Snow swallowed Caleb's boots, with every step turning each stride into a battle. Echo zigzagged ahead, pausing, often checking the wind for scents Caleb couldn't read. Her tail stayed low, movements taut an unspoken warning. "They'll crest the ridge soon," he murmured. Echo flicked an ear back at him. Caleb steadied his breath, adjusting the rifle strap digging into his shoulder. His fingers were raw from climbing. A dull ache throbbed in his left leg, the old shrapnel injury lighting up from exertion. Not convenient, not negotiable, but not enough to stop him. "We make the tree line, then the service road," he whispered. "From there, it's 3 miles to town. You and me, girl, we've done worse." A branch snapped behind them. Echo spun body, dropping into a low crouch. Caleb froze. Movement rippled along the ridge, shadows crossing between trees. Too many. Moving fast. "They're tracking downhill," Caleb said, voice barely air. "They know where the shaft comes out." A gust of cold wind carried voices distant but closing. Caleb reached down, brushing Echo's side. "Go. Now." They plunged through the snow, weaving through evergreens, until the forest opened onto the old service road, a narrow strip of compacted earth, now buried under a foot of powder. Echo sprinted ahead, ears forward. Caleb followed. Then tracks. Fresh, paired, deep, tire treads. Something heavy had come through only minutes earlier. A chill slid down Caleb's spine. They beat us to the road. He jogged forward, examining the impressions. The tires turned sharply toward town, not away. Toward. He straightened slowly as realization sank in. "They're heading to town," he whispered. Echo whined, nudging his hand. "No, girl, not to find us." He imagined the stream. The black-veined rock, the drone, the corporate scanner, the urgency in the men's voices. "This isn't cleanup," he murmured. "It's containment." The tire tracks angled down the road with purpose. "They're going to the water plant." Echo paced anxiously beside him. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're planning to shut it down. Destroy evidence before anyone can test it." His mission sharpened instantly. They weren't just escaping anymore. They were racing a clock. The crossroads. He checked his watch. Nearly noon. Weather worsening again. 3 miles, he muttered. We'll run it. Echo barked once agreement. They ran. The service road curved around a steep drop, opening onto a vast sweep of valley. Down below, the tiny town sat tucked between frozen fields. Smoke curled from chimneys. Cars crept along icy streets. People lived their small, ordinary lives, unaware of the poison sliding beneath their feet. Caleb's chest tightened. How long had the contamination been flowing? Years? Decades? How many people had gotten sick without knowing why? His breath caught as a memory flashed his mother gaunt in her final months, clutching his hand after her cancer diagnosis. It doesn't run in our family, she'd whispered. He stumbled a step, almost dropping to his knees. Echo circled back, bumping him gently. I'm okay, he breathed, steadying himself. We keep moving. His watch vibrated on his wrist. A text alert. He froze. No one texted him anymore. Glancing around, heart thudding, he pulled the phone out and lifted it to the weak daylight. Unknown number. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Another buzz. Turn around, Caleb. His blood chilled. They have my number, he whispered. They're in the network, Echo growled, reading the tension in his posture. He shoved the phone deep into his coat and ran harder. Snow blurred. Breath burned. Echo's paws churned furiously ahead. At the next bend, his phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Buzz. Buzz. At last he pulled it out. A new message. Stop running. We're already in town. Echo barked once, alarm sharp. Caleb skidded to a halt at the overlook. 2 black SUVs were parked beside the Water Authority building at the far edge of town. Men moved around them. Hurried. Purposeful. One carried a portable incinerator unit. Another hauled a crate stamped with a hazard insignia. A third held what looked unmistakably like demolition charges. Caleb's throat constricted. They're not just burying evidence, he whispered. They're blowing it. Echo pressed against his leg as if to ground him. We can't let them do it, he said. Echo's tail rose confident. Together they sprinted down the slope. Flashback the blast. Halfway down the hill, Caleb's injured leg seized. He stumbled. Echo skidded to a halt, circling back with a frantic whine. Not now, he gasped, gripping his thigh. The pain bloomed a bright, nauseating burst. His vision blurred, then shifted. Sand. Fire. Screaming metal. A Humvee flipped on its side. He was crawling toward Echo. No, not Echo. His last military dog, Ace, pinned beneath burning debris. Ace had whined eyes locked on Caleb. Then the explosion ripped everything away. Caleb lurched back to the present with a strangled gasp. Echo stood still, head pressed to his chest, anchoring him. Okay, he breathed. Okay, I'm here. Not there. He dragged himself upright. Echo stayed pressed to his hip until his breathing steadied. I'm not losing you too, he said, voice breaking for a second. Echo nudged him once firm. Mission. Forward. The dark night begins. By the time they reached the lower ridge, the SUVs were already pulling away from the water building, heading toward town square. No, Caleb hissed. No. The men weren't blowing the building. They were planting charges on the water mains. He watched in horror as one man pried open a steel access panel. Another lowered a cylindrical charge into the pipe beneath. If they ignited it, the underground main would rupture, flushing contaminated water through half the valley, destroying years of any sampleable evidence, and maybe poisoning the town even more. Echo barked sharply. We have to split them, Caleb muttered. Draw them away. He ducked into the trees, moving parallel to the road. But the men weren't distracted. One lifted a radio, spoke into it, and immediately turned his head up the ridge, directly toward Caleb's hiding spot. Echo tensed. Caleb's breath caught. We're compromised, he whispered. A man shouted. On the ridge, 2 SUVs peeled away from the water mains and gunned straight up the access road toward them. Trees shook from the engine's roar. Caleb and Echo bolted deeper into the woods, snow spiraling around them. Shots cracked through the air, splintering branches. Echo veered left, forcing Caleb to follow. She sensed something, an escape route, a threat. They burst into a clearing and stopped dead. A cliff. A sheer drop into a ravine choked with ice boulders. The SUVs skidded to a halt behind them. Doors flew open. 4 men stepped out, rifles raised. Snowflakes drifted around them like falling ash. One of the men called out, "It's over, Rourke. You're surrounded." Caleb raised his hand slowly, rifle hanging from one by the strap. Echo planted herself in front of him, teeth bared. "Don't," he whispered. "Not yet." The leader stepped forward. "If you'd taken the deal, the man said you'd have lived long enough to be rich. But you walked away from that." Caleb's voice cracked, not in fear but fury. "I walked toward the truth." The man scoffed. then die with it. He raised his rifle. Caleb opened his mouth to tell Echo to run, to get away, to find help, to live. But Echo didn't wait. She lunged, straight at the gunman, a blur of fur and fury. A shot cracked. Echo yelped sharp, agonizing. No, Caleb roared. He dove forward, hitting the leader like a battering ram. They crashed into the snow. The rifle flew from his hands. Chaos erupted. Echo dragged herself up, limping, but still snapping toward a second attacker. Snow sprayed from her paws as she forced herself forward on raw instinct. Caleb grappled with the first man, driving an elbow into his throat. Gunfire rang from behind. Sparks kicked up from the rocks. Another bullet ricocheted off a tree trunk inches from Caleb's head. He dragged himself to Echo as a third man fired again. A bullet tore into the snow between them. Echo's blood painted the snow red. Caleb cradled her head. Her breath shuddered. Her eyes, bright moments ago, dimmed with pain. The third man stepped closer, rifle steady. "It's over," he said coldly. Caleb bowed his forehead to Echo's. "I'm so sorry, girl," he whispered. He wasn't weeping. He was hollowing out emotion, collapsing inward like a mineshaft imploding. He stood slowly, raising trembling hands. The man stepped toward him, then froze. A new sound cut through the storm, a distant siren, growing louder, then louder, echoing, rising, flooding the valley like salvation. The man cursed. Fed's Caleb blinked, chest-hitching with disbelief. Echo nudged his boot with her nose faint but stubborn. He knelt, pressing both hands to her wound. "You stay with me," he whispered fiercely. "You don't leave me, you hear?" The siren screamed closer. The men scrambled. The SUVs peeled away in a spray of snow. Caleb gathered Echo into his arms, legs shaking, and staggered toward the road. Lights crested the ridge. Blue, red, flashing bright. He stumbled into the path of the first vehicle. The brakes screamed. Agents burst out with weapons drawn, then froze at the sight of Echo bleeding in Caleb's arms. One voice broke through. Firm, familiar. Caleb Grace. She ran toward him, coat flapping behind her, snow swirling around her boots. Caleb choked out. "They're blowing the water mains. They shot her, they." Grace grabbed his shoulders. "We've got you. We've got both of you." Caleb collapsed to his knees. He pressed his face into Echo's neck, whispering through tears. He didn't remember starting. "Please stay. Please stay. Please stay." Echo's tail thumped once. Barely. But enough. Echo's blood soaked through Caleb's fingers, hot against the numbness of his hands. Snowflakes landed on her muzzle and melted instantly. "Stay with me," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You don't clock out on me, you hear?" Her eyes fluttered, then fixed on his. A small, stubborn spark. Bootsteps pounded around them. Doors slammed. Radios crackled. "Medic," someone shouted. "We've got a K9 hit and one veteran conscious, possible shock." Caleb barely registered the words. He held Echo's gaze as if staring hard enough could anchor her. A hand gripped his shoulder. "Caleb." He blinked up into Grace Monroe's face. Snow clung to her dark hair, lashes rimmed with ice, but her eyes were clear, fierce. "You're late," he rasped. She almost smiled. Traffic. Two medics slid to their knees beside Echo, gentle but efficient. One pressed gauze to the wound, the other opened a kit. "We need to move her to the van," one said. Caleb's hands tightened. "Careful." "We've got her," the medic replied. Bullet went through the muscle, missed bone and artery. "Hurts like hell, but she's got a shot." "Got a shot." The words punched air back into his chest. Echo whined as they lifted her onto a stretcher. Caleb rose with them, one hand, never leaving her fur. Grace stepped back just enough to take in the hillside, the tire tracks, the ravine. "What happened?" she asked. "They were planting charges," Caleb said. His voice shook, but didn't break. "At the mains, at the water authority. And they've been working the tunnels upslope. They're hiding something down there. Something in the rock, in the stream." "Slow down," she said. Start with his phone buzzed again in his pocket. He yanked it out. Another message from the unknown number. "You're too late." A cold nausea swept through him. He shoved the screen at Grace. "They're still moving. They're ahead of us." One of the troopers jogged up, breath puffing white. "Ma'am, we've got eyes on multiple charges at the South Main. Timers are armed. 15 minutes, maybe less." Grace's jaw clenched. "Can we disarm, maybe? But if they're wired in series, one misstep blows the line," Caleb finished. Grace looked from the trooper to Caleb, weighing choices in a heartbeat. "Where are the rest of my units?" she snapped into her radio. A tinny voice replied. 2 minutes out from the plant. 3 from the ridge. FBI Environmental Crimes Unit is inbound, but at least an hour away. An hour. They didn't have 10 minutes. Echo barked once from the stretcher. Sharp. Urgent. Caleb turned. Even sedated by pain, she had shoved her head up, ears pitched toward town. Toward the water. He heard at the same moment she did a distant hollow boom. Not loud, not near. Underground. Every head snapped in that direction. The troopers swore. They set one off. Secondary line, maybe an upstream valve. The booms might not be big enough to rupture the main yet, but they could be testing charges. They're trying to collapse the evidence into the system, Caleb said. If they get all the mains, there won't be samples left to prove anything. Grace's radio crackled again. Monroe, this is plant security. 2 men in utility jackets just left the east gate in an unmarked truck. They had clearance cards I haven't seen before. Grace cut in. Do not let them back inside. Lock it down. Gate's already sealed, ma'am, but they're gone. Heading toward town square, Caleb finished. They're going to set final charges where no one will question a little construction. Grace met his eyes. How do you know? She asked. Because that's what I'd do, he said. If I was trying to bury a crime by turning it into an accident. He didn't mean to sound so sure. But the soldier's brain recognized strategy when it saw it. Grace exhaled sharply, decision made. Okay, we split. Troopers to the mains and plant. My unit with me to town. Caleb. He straightened. I'm coming. She shook her head. You're injured. And you're a civilian. This is law enforcement now. You don't know what you're walking into, he shot back. They had men trained, wired, and patient enough to hunt us on the ridge. The ones in town won't be any softer, and I know their pattern better than anyone. Echo let out a throaty, insistent bark. Grace glanced at the dog, then back at Caleb. Caleb said. She's coming too. The medic looked horrified. Absolutely not. She needs a clinic, and you're going to give her one, Grace said, voice clipped. Stabilize her in the van and follow us in. If those mains blow, we'll need every pair of working legs to move people. She turned to Caleb. You stay with me. You follow my lead. You do not play hero. He almost laughed. Grace, I got shot at before breakfast. I'm past the flashy hero phase. Her mouth twitched. Get in the truck. He jogged to the passenger side of her SUV leg, protesting with every step. Echo's stretcher slid into the back of the medic van. The doors thumped shut. As Grace pulled onto the icy road, sirens screaming ahead of them, Caleb caught one last glimpse of Echo through the rear window, lying still, eyes open, locked on him. He nodded once. Hang on, soldier. The convoy roared downhill. The clock had started. They hit the outskirts in under 5 minutes, sirens echoing off storefronts, lights flashing across snow-glazed glass. People stepped out of diners, hardware stores, the post office faces drawn and confused. What's going on down there? Someone shouted as Grace's SUV sped past. Inside, a trooper yelled from another car. Get inside and stay away from windows. Caleb stared out at the familiar streets, the diner where he'd nursed coffee instead of sleep, the pharmacy where he'd picked up prescriptions with names he couldn't pronounce, the bench outside the library where he'd once sat with Echo watching other people live. All of it balanced on pipes full of water that might be carrying a poison nobody had measured yet. Grace's radio crackled. Units at the mains report first charge diffused. Repeat, first charge diffused. 2 more located. Timers staggered. Working on them. Caleb's shoulders loosened a fraction. Then the voice added, no visual on the suspects. They're ahead of us. Grace took a hard turn toward the town square. There, a cluster of decorative lampposts encircled the old stone fountain dry for winter ringed in ice. Kids had sledded down that gentle slope a week ago. Now 2 men in orange utility vests knelt at the base of one lamppost, hand tools out a steel panel pried open at their feet. One looked up as the convoy screeched into view. His expression flickered, not surprise. Annoyance. He slapped his partner's shoulder. They bolted. Grace slammed the SUV into park. Stay, she ordered out of habit. Caleb was already out the door. The men sprinted toward the alley behind the bakery boots, skidding on ice patches. Grace and 2 troopers tore after them, weapons drawn. Caleb veered toward the open panel. A rectangular device sat inside the cavity where the lampost's base-fed wiring and water accessed small matte black, a digital timer ticking down. 0847. 0846. 0845. Charge, he snapped. One trooper skidded to a stop beside him. You know how to disarm that, maybe Caleb said. Or maybe I know how not to. He scanned the connections. The cylinder wasn't strapped to a water main, it was wired into a relay switch. He followed the cables visually into the ground toward the main. He swore softly. This is a trigger. Remote. How many more, the trooper asked. Depends how thorough they were. Footsteps pounded behind them. Caleb turned. The medic van screeched into the square. Its back doors burst open. Echo launched out. She shouldn't have been able to. One leg was heavily bandaged. Painkillers shimmered her eyes, but she hit the ground running unsteady but determined nose working furiously. Echo, Caleb shouted. She ignored him. She sniffed along the lamppost base, then jerked her head toward the fountain and bolted. Caleb swore and sprinted after her legs, screaming. Echo skidded to a stop at a second lamppost on the far side of the fountain. She shoved her nose against its base, pawing hard. Another panel. Another trigger. Caleb dropped to his knees, yanking it open. 0732. He looked at Echo. You're finding the chain, he breathed. Her tail swept once, then she turned and limped toward a third lamppost, circling it, whining sharply. Troopers spread out as if reading her intent. Check every base, one shouted. If the dog alerts pop it, panels opened. Timers blinked. 0650. 0649. Chain charges. Linked to blow the square's junction, maybe collapse mains below in one synchronized blast. If Echo hadn't smelled the duplicate casings through snow and ice, they might have diffused only the first. The rest would have stayed hidden until it was too late. Caleb swallowed hard. You just changed the whole fight, he whispered to her. She panted, chest heaving, but her eyes were fierce. Grace's voice cut through the chaos from the alley. Drop the weapon, hands where I can see them. A shot cracked. Glass shattered. Caleb jerked his head up. Grace, finish the disarm. Rourke, she yelled back. We've got them. He turned back to the first trigger, forcing his shaking hands to steady. Timer 0519. He unclipped the device from the relay tracing wires, one to a distribution box, one piggybacked on the lamppost's electrical line, one leading into a bundle that disappeared toward the street. Red, the trooper beside him, ventured. Caleb almost laughed. It's never Red. Echo limped closer, leaning against his side. He forced a slow breath. Thought of tunnel wiring overseas, of IEDs disguised in road trash, of mentors barking, follow the power, not the paint, over ringing ears. He found the primary feed, a braided pair running from the trigger to the distribution box. Got you, he muttered. He pinched the wires, slid his pocket knife under, and sliced. The timer blinked. 0503. 0502. Then froze. The display went blank. He sagged with relief. Unit 1 disarmed, the trooper shouted. Chain 1 is cold. Across the square, another officer yelled. Second device offline, Echo barked feebly as if counting with them. The last panel's trooper called out thirds disabled. Caleb exhaled, shoulders dropping. Then a new sound cut through the square. A car engine revving hard. He spun toward the alley. A dark sedan fishtailed into view, tires spitting slush, two men barely visible inside. One trooper lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Grace crouched behind a dumpster gun up, jaw set. The sedan roared past the square perimeter, smashing through a snowbank and onto the main street. They're running for the highway, someone shouted. Grace scrambled to her feet, shouted into the radio unit. 3, cut them off at Ridge Road. Do not let them reach the state line. She turned, eyes blazing, and pointed at Caleb. You're coming with me, she snapped. You're our witness, and they know it. He swallowed. And Echo. The medic was already lifting the dog back into the van. We can work on her while we move, he said. But make it quick. Echo met Caleb's eyes as the doors closed. He put a hand on the metal. I'll finish it, he whispered. Then we come home. The medic nodded sharply and slammed the doors. Caleb climbed back into Grace's SUV, chest tight. The convoy peeled out of the square and chased the fleeing sedan toward the ridge. The storm followed. The clock for the moment had been stolen from the enemy. Now it was down to the last play. Grace's SUV fishtailed onto the highway, sirens wailing behind them. Snow whipped sideways across the windshield, the storm clawing its way back over the mountains like it refused to miss the ending. Up ahead, the fleeing sedan tore down the icy two-lane road, taillights blinking through the haze. Caleb braced his good leg against the floorboard, gripping the dashboard to steady himself. His pulse thudded hard in his ears. He wasn't thinking about his injuries. He wasn't even thinking about himself. All he could see was Echo's blood on the snow. Grace's downshifted voice clipped. They're heading to the overlook. Road dead ends in half a mile. Caleb's mind flashed the terrain, tight curves, steep drop, no guardrails in sections. They'll try to dump evidence over the ridge, he said. Or themselves, Grace replied. Better than being taken alive. Her radio crackled. Unit 3 is in position at the junction. Roadblock set. Hold, Grace ordered. Do not engage without our eyes on them. The sedan hit a patch of ice, swerved hard, then corrected violently. Its back bumper scraped against a snowbank, showering powder into the air. They're bleeding control, Caleb muttered. Grace leaned forward, eyes sharp. They're desperate. Desperation breaks patterns. The sedan fishtailed again, then bolted around a bend. Grace accelerated. Caleb forced down the rising dread coiling under his ribs. Grace, those men aren't mules. They're handlers. And handlers don't run unless they have something worth dying over, she finished. The SUV crested the next hill, and the world opened onto the overlook. The sedan had spun out half-buried, nose first in a drift. Two men jumped out, one clutching a metal case, the other covering him with a pistol. Grace hit the brakes hard. Snow sprayed forward in a white arc as the SUV skidded to a stop. Two FBI units boxed the men in from the rear. Grace threw her door open. "Drop your weapon." The man with the pistol didn't. Caleb saw it in the man's stance, the rigid set of his shoulders, the twitch in his jaw. He was about to fire. Caleb didn't think. He moved. The standoff. He stepped out into the wind, hands raised, not in surrender, but to draw the shooter's attention away from Grace. "Hey," Caleb shouted. "You want the witness right? I'm right here." Grace hissed Caleb, too late. The gunman snapped toward him. Recognition flared in the man's eyes. "Rourke," he snarled. The pistol lifted. Caleb's breath vanished. Then a black blur slammed into the gunman's side. Echo. Her bandaged shoulder tore open as she launched herself out of the medic van behind the FBI trucks, pain-forgotten instinct taking over. Her jaws clamped around the shooter's forearm. The gun fired upward, the shot cracking harmlessly into the sky. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. Echo Caleb lunged toward them. The second man carrying the metal case panicked and bolted toward the cliff edge. Grace sprinted after him, shouting stop. He didn't. He swung the case like a weapon, clipped Grace across the temple and sent her stumbling. Caleb tore the pistol free from the disarmed gunman's hand and sprinted toward the cliff. Ahead of him, the case carrier skidded on ice, lost his balance, and tumbled onto his stomach, still clutching the metal case. He began to slide. "Let go of the case," Caleb yelled. The man didn't. He dug his fingers in harder, dragging the case with him. The icy edge cracked beneath his weight. Caleb dove, grabbing the man's coat collar. "Drop it. If this gets out," the man spat, "the company dies. You don't get it. This ridge is worth more than the ice shelf gave way." Caleb's boots slid on the snow. His injured leg buckled. The man screamed as he and the case dropped. Caleb lunged again, fingers brushing the handle missed by inches, and the metal case plummeted into the ravine, vanishing into the storm below. The man hit an outcropping halfway down, crumpling motionlessly. Silence swallowed the overlook. Caleb staggered back, chest heaving. Echo limped toward him, muzzle red tail beating weakly despite the pain. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around her neck. "You insane, perfect girl," he whispered into her fur. "You saved us. You saved everyone." His voice shook not with fear, but gratitude so deep it hollowed him. Grace approached, holding a handkerchief to her bleeding temple. "You good?" Caleb asked. She nodded. "You." He nodded back. They both looked toward the ravine. Grace exhaled. "The case is gone." "It doesn't matter," Caleb said quietly. Grace raised an eyebrow. How Caleb looked down at Echo. "She led me to the chain charges," he said. "The timers, the triggers, they were all linked. We disarmed the system. The town's safe." Evidence Grace pressed. Caleb tapped his chest. "I saw the stream. I saw the rock. I saw the samples." Then he gestured toward the medic van. "And everything in Silas Rourke's ledger, your team already secured it. They can't bury it anymore. Not with feds on the ridge and witnesses on record." Grace's expression softened. "Caleb, you just took down a corporation." He shook his head. "No, Echo did." Echo nuzzled his chin, exhausted but alive. Decisive action, the dog's moment. The troopers cuffed the surviving shooter. Medics swarmed Echo again. The storm quieted as if listening. One medic muttered, "She shouldn't have been able to move like that. Not in her condition." Caleb smiled faintly. "Try telling her that." Grace knelt beside him. "We'll rebuild the case. With what we found in the mine, what Silas documented, and what Echo uncovered today, we've got enough to bury them legally instead of literally." Caleb let out a long, slow breath, and with it something inside him loosened. The old guilt, the buried grief, the pain he'd carried since losing Ace. All of it exhaled into the cold air. Echo nudged his hand. He rested his palm on her head. "It's over," he said softly. "We're going home." But even he didn't yet realize home wasn't the cabin. It was wherever Echo walked beside him. The storm eased into a whisper, more snowfall than wind, as if the ridge itself were finally letting go. Emergency lights painted the snow in pulses of red and blue, reflecting off the jagged cliff where the case had fallen. Caleb stood slowly, his knees stiff, his entire body trembling not from cold but from everything that had broken open inside him. Echo lay on a padded sled. The medics had brought her head up, eyes tracking Caleb with unshakable focus. Even wounded, even exhausted, she refused to fade into the background. "You're impossible," he whispered. She blinked once, slow and stubborn, which in Echo language meant correct. Grace stepped beside him, her breath curling into the frosty air. She watched the medic stabilize Echo's bandage again, then turned to Caleb. "You realize she single-handedly prevented a mass contamination event, uncovered a corporate sabotage plan, and tackled a gunman twice her size while bleeding out." "Yes," Caleb shrugged lightly. "She's always been an overachiever." Grace chuckled despite her bruised temple. "Caleb, you did good. You didn't freeze. You didn't fall apart. You led us through hell." He held her gaze for a beat. Then he said quietly, "I wasn't leading. I was following her." Grace looked over at the dog admiration, softening her expression. "Smartest soldier on the ridge." One of the medics approached. "We've stabilized her enough for transport. She's tough, but she needs a surgical clinic." Caleb's stomach clenched. "Nearest one 15 minutes down the valley. Let's not waste any." Caleb nodded and turned toward Echo, kneeling beside the sled. Snow fell lightly on her fur. She looked smaller, somehow hurt, tired, but her eyes were still flame-bright. He touched her cheek gently. "I'm right behind you, girl. I'm not going anywhere." The medic stepped back respectfully, letting Caleb have a moment. Echo shifted, forcing her good paw onto Caleb's knee, anchoring him the same way she'd done in every dark moment since he left the service. His throat tightened. "You saved my life twice today," he murmured. "You saved the whole damn town. And you still worry about me." Echo let out a soft rumble, not a growl, a reassurance. A siren blared once to signal departure. Grace squeezed Caleb's shoulder. "Ride with her. I'll coordinate cleanup." And Caleb, he turned. "Don't carry what isn't yours anymore," she said. "Your grandfather's shadow, the guilt, the war, none of it belongs to you now. You did the right thing." He hesitated, then nodded. Because for the first time in years, the weight inside him felt lighter. He followed the medics to the van, climbing in beside Echo as they drove toward the clinic. Her head rested against his thigh, breath slow but steady. Caleb stared out the window at the dark pines sliding past. He whispered, barely audible over the hum of the engine, "I'm not losing you." "Not this time." Echo nudged his hand once. Promise heard, promise accepted. The fluorescent lights hummed softly as the vet techs carried Echo into the emergency stall. Caleb followed until a nurse blocked his path gently. "You can't be in the room during surgery." He froze. "No, I can't just leave her." "You're not leaving her. You're letting us help her." Grace, who'd arrived minutes later with a flurry of agents and paperwork, caught Caleb's arm. "Come on. Waiting doesn't mean abandoning." He let himself be pulled into the hallway. Minutes blurred, then stretched, then collapsed into hours. Caleb sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tight they shook. Every time the surgery door swung open, he flinched. Grace sat beside him, silent but steady. "You know," she said softly, "you didn't freeze on that ridge. But your face right now looks like you're surviving something harder." Caleb swallowed. "War teaches you to lose partners, dogs, men. You learn it so well you start expecting it, planning for it. But Echo," his voice cracked, surprising, even him. "She didn't care what I'd lost. She stayed anyway." Grace's tone softened. "She's staying now." He stared at the closed surgery door. "God, I hope so." Without warning, a memory rose unbidden but sharp. Ace, pinned under the burning, Humvee howling in fear but still trying to crawl toward him. Caleb had been pinned under debris himself, helpless as flames crept closer. He remembered screaming Ace's name until his throat tore. He remembered the sound of the final blast. He remembered nothing afterward except silence. Cold, empty, permanent. He blinked the memory away hard. Echo wasn't Ace, and he wasn't the same broken soldier he'd been then. At last the surgeon stepped into the hall, pulling off gloves. Caleb shot to his feet. "Well," he asked, nearly out of breath. The surgeon's face softened. "She's tough. The bullet missed anything vital. We repaired the muscle, closed the wound, and she's stable." Caleb's lungs finally pulled in air. "Can I?" "She's waking up. Go slowly. She's groggy." Caleb nearly ran through the doorway. Echo lay on a padded bed, wrapped in warm blankets. One leg was shaved and bandaged. Her eyes cracked open as Caleb approached. She gave a tiny, drowsy groan. He knelt, pressing his forehead to hers. "You came back," he whispered. Her tail thumped once. Caleb laughed softly, a wet, shaky sound he didn't try to hide. Yeah, I guess we both did. Grace leaned at the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet smile on her face. We'll need your full statement in the morning, she said, but for tonight you two did something good. Something honest. That matters. Caleb stroked Echo's cheek. Good girl, he murmured. My best girl. Echo pushed her nose weakly into his palm. The war inside him, the one that had never really stopped, lost ground in that moment. Not because the violence was over, but because he'd finally chosen something worth protecting. Something that protected him back. 3 days later, the mountain breathed in silence. Fresh snow dusted the branches, turning the trees into still white statues. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean, cold enough to sting, pure enough to feel new. Caleb stood on the porch of his grandfather's cabin boots, planted in the snow breath, rising in slow clouds. In his hands, he held Silas Rourke's old leather ledger, the one found in the cabin floorboards, the one that had started all of this. He thumbed the worn cover. Silas's handwriting filled the pages, survey notes, water measurements, chemical warnings, sketches of the black-veined rock. Proof the old man had tried to stop what was bleeding under the mountain long before anyone believed him. Caleb closed the ledger gently. You were right, he whispered to the empty morning. You tried to save this place. I just never knew how much. A soft crunch sounded beside him. Echo stepped onto the porch, moving carefully on her healing leg. Her bandage had been replaced with a lighter wrap, and though she still walked with a slight hitch, she held her head high, proud alert, her tail sweeping slow arcs of contentment. Hey, soldier, Caleb murmured. Echo nudged his hip, then sat beside him, nose pointed toward the valley. Down below the town was quiet under soft winter Sunday, but there was movement too. Work trucks at the water plant. Scientists in white suits collecting samples at the ridge. Federal agents interviewing residents. News vans cautiously rolling down Main Street. The truth had spread faster than the storm. Apex Terra's executives had been arrested 2 nights ago. Environmental crimes, fraud, concealment, endangerment. The tunnel was being excavated for evidence. The contaminated stream had been diverted and treated. The town's water system, shaken but intact, was now under federal oversight. Grace had called that morning with an update. It'll take time, she'd said, but we're fixing it. You and Echo set something in motion that can't be undone. He believed her. Finally. Caleb leaned against the porch post, watching Echo test her weight on her injured leg. You know, he said quietly the night I came home from the service, I didn't think I'd belong anywhere again. Echo's ear flicked toward him. I thought the war was all I had. That Ace's death was the story I had to live with. He exhaled white fog dissolving into morning light. But you taught me something here. Something I should have learned a long time ago. Echo turned her head eyes, meeting his. You don't walk out of the dark alone, he whispered. You walk out with someone who refuses to let you stay there. Echo pressed her head into his palm. That was her answer, and her promise. He stepped off the porch and followed Echo toward the edge of the trees, where the ridge opened into the white world below. Echo sniffed the windtail swaying. Caleb smiled. Yeah, lead the way. They walked together along the trail, slow, unhurried, a veteran and the dog who'd saved him in more ways than one. The forest held no threat today, only quiet, only healing. At the overlook, Caleb knelt beside Echo and scratched behind her ears. New start, he said softly. We earned that. Echo leaned into him. Below them, the valley glowed. And in that glow, Caleb found something he hadn't felt in years, a future. Not because the danger was gone, some battles leave echoes long after the gunfire stops. Not because justice was done sometimes, justice is slow, imperfect, incomplete, but because he'd changed. He'd stopped running from ghosts. He'd stopped blaming himself for the things he couldn't save. He'd chosen to stand for his grandfather, for his town, for his dog, and for himself. And Echo had stood with him. As they turned back toward the cabin, a gentle wind swept through the firs, sending snow drifting like quiet applause. Caleb glanced down at Echo, ready to go home. She bumped his leg with her nose, then trotted ahead, leading him up the trail. Snow crunched under their steps. Pine branches bowed overhead like a cathedral. The mountain, once a place of buried secrets, felt lighter, almost grateful. Caleb followed the dog who had pulled him out of darkness and into purpose. And as Echo's tail swung through the soft morning light, that image, a loyal dog guiding a wounded man toward home, lingered like a promise he'd spend the rest of his life honoring. END